Consumers are crying out for more personalized products. Brands are crying over too much inventory. Digitization is being hailed as the solution to both problems. It can make pre-production faster, make product design more flexible, and, of course, save costs. Digital printing has been one of the earliest technologies to gain real market share. Starting out as a solution for making customized t-shirts, the technology has now been used by almost every apparel category. Advancement in equipment have enabled textile manufacturers to print on rolls of fabric, a critical development in supporting smaller orders. Digital printing can now be applied to almost any base material, a big win for active sports, intimate apparel, and knitwear. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Today I'm speaking with Andy Yarrow, digital printing industry veteran with 2 decades of hands-on experience. Andy has held senior management roles with some of the world's leading digital printing companies, including Kornit Digital and EFI. I reached out to him to learn about what he saw as the biggest opportunities for brands and what were some of the new developments in digital printing. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, if you're looking for a sharp view of global sourcing, or you're struggling to get your quarterly sourcing reports done, you might want to take a look at the current situation in sourcing. These executive snapshot reports include all the insights and data you need without you having to do the work. If you'd like more information, there's a link in the show notes here. Thanks for joining us today, Andy. I'm really looking forward to learning more about some of the new developments in digital printing, particularly now that everybody is looking for more flexibility and more customization.
Absolutely, James. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to join the podcast. We're living in an interesting time for sure, and it's great to be able to share some of my insights and experience in my 20-plus year career in transferring analog to digital in many forms of technology. So it's great to have the opportunity to share it with you.
I think that there's so much being presented to the market right now, and I think that for a lot of execs, it's difficult to really understand out of everything, every solution that's being presented, which ones are the most practical. And as we were talking about before, is it practical, but for what segment of the market?
It's kind of interesting. The world that I've been living in for the past few years, it's really focused on customer demand and changing the supply chain. You know, we live in a world where the printing element of any solution, whether that's in display graphics or commercial print, kind of catalogs and magazines and booklets or corrugated boxes and all these kind of areas that I've been working for the past kind of 20 years, the print element is often the easiest part. The challenge, I guess, comes from the supply chain element of things. And certainly the people that I've been speaking to, they understand the requirement for digitizing and changing the way that products are made and designs are created and printed. But then fundamentally, the challenges are really on the supply chain side of things as well. So digitization, digital printing in fashion is certainly not something that's new. But what I see is a big change in the acceleration towards changing the supply chain, particularly with what's been happening with COVID. So I think every day you can probably pick up some trade magazine or look at an email and see that there's a big push towards reducing inventory, reshoring and nearshoring. And that all takes time to achieve because these are technologies and they're businesses that have been around for many, many years. But now there's a real reason to do this, to save on waste stock or waste product, to save on shipping costs and all these types of very quantifiable differences and real quantifiable, I guess, reasons to change the supply chain. So that's where we're seeing things. And it's really putting a huge acceleration as we see this inflection point in the industry that's been driven by COVID.
Yeah, well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly if people didn't want to carry a lot of inventory prior to COVID, they surely don't want to carry a lot of inventory right now. So the flexibility, of course, is critical.
No, I was going to say, and the other thing we have to imagine as well, and I have to think about, Jane, is that not only is the production of product changed, but the way that people buy has been changed significantly as well. You know, we're very close, I think, to another lockdown here in Hong Kong. We've had a spike of cases, as you've seen in the past few days. Europe has been pretty much locked down for most of the year, so is the Americas. So fundamentally, the way that people shop and acquire the products will change pretty significantly as well in the next 2 to 3 years.
I know certainly buyers are going to be very wary. What do you see right now as the newest or most important developments?
For me, I see the most important development is on the ink side. And that's really been driven by a lot of the demands from the consumer. There's nothing really new about printing technology and putting ink onto material, onto fabric. But really the difference now and what customers and consumers are more focused on is really on the sustainability element of things, because they've seen the stories about the waste of product. So really where the big focus is on pigment ink, because it reduces drastically the amount of waste water that's going back into the environment. And, you have the younger generations and eco warriors, if you like, who they see the planet that they're going to inherit, and they want to make sure that they are leaving a better footprint for their children and so on. So there's a huge push now, particularly in the digital manufacturers, to focus on developing a pigment solution which doesn't have the same washing and steaming and post and pre-processes that most, I say, traditional digital technologies like acid and reactive have.
What about a cost factor? Because I know that initially one of the big challenges with digital printing was that the inks were expensive, the consumables were expensive, and so a lot of companies weren't able to do that.
Well, there is a cost element to it, of course, and I think when you look at the types of brands who would want to be more sustainable, the high fashion brands, the kind of street brands, the fast fashion brands want to be more sustainable because it's their target market. These are the guys that are getting hit by the whole waste situation. Where's the cost factored in when they have to throw a huge amount of product away? So there is a cost to it. I think the younger generation are prepared to pay more for something that's more sustainable and something that's personalized as well. And that's where obviously we've been talking to many customers over the past few years about personalization and much more self-expression. So these are the things that people are prepared to pay for because it's a much more personal statement that gives them that chance to express themselves.
Well, I think certainly over the past few years we've seen the T-shirt business that's just exploded. I mean, the number of people, whether it be big brands or individual guys, right, running a T-shirt business basically out of their grandmother's basement, that's been a massive industry. I mean, there's so many online stores where you can create your own design or you can order your own design from individual artists. What share of the market would you say are selling, digital printers to individual or very small businesses versus selling to massive businesses?
I think it really depends. First of all, you're absolutely right, and it's much easier now to set up a business with Shopify and Amazon and all of these online players that just make it so easy for people to set up a business and do things online and to get into a small T-shirt printer. It's not an overly expensive investment. So you get a young guys setting up their businesses and really building on all of this. I think there's a significant difference by region. So I think there's a huge change per region. If you look at America being the number one by a long way, then Europe closely behind. Asia Pacific's got a long way to catch up, and I think the smaller players are much more prevalent in those bigger markets. And then obviously you have some of the big guys in Europe really wanting to kind of expand into Asia Pacific, and Europe and the US expand into Asia Pacific and take their share of this huge market over here.
Certainly Asia is the next big region, whether or not it's going to be a big market for T-shirts or not.
Look, I think we should probably look at a couple of different things. Obviously, you've got the end consumer, who is obviously there's many millions of end consumers here in Asia Pacific, but then you've got those small micro brands as well. So let's look at the 2 or 3 different areas. So there's the end consumer who would want to go online and create their own T-shirt, maybe for a bachelor party or for a baby shower or something along those lines, which are obviously becoming much more popular. So that's the kind of the big mass market, if you like. It's people ordering individual products. Then you have the small kind of micro brands. Someone who's come out of fashion college, or they've developed a sportswear brand that they want to share. I was in the gym earlier. You used to kind of see the people wearing their yoga pants and things like that from big brands, but We also have people creating their own micro brands as well in the sportswear area that are becoming pretty big. And then obviously you've got the much bigger brands, the huge multinational, international brands who will maybe take a little slower to convert. But there's a huge market in all of those different areas that it really shows the size of the opportunity in fashion, that it's not just people who are ordering on-demand T-shirts. It's the person who wants to create 5 or 10 different styles to sell to their friends and put in a local gym. I have a friend who has their own fashion brand here in Hong Kong, and there's many people like that all over the world who want to share their designs and their fashion.
Yes. Well, certainly, in a sense, digital printing, now that there are smaller digital printers, has really democratized the ability to customize things like that. So it's given an opportunity to many independent producers or designers. So if you're looking at digital printing right now, particularly if you're looking at it towards someone who's either a mid-tier or perhaps a bigger operation, what do you feel that people either don't understand or misunderstand? As someone, when you're talking to, let's say, companies who are looking at getting into digital printing?
I think the biggest thing is understanding how to charge, understanding what to ask customers to pay for it. And I think if I go back to my days in digital print in other markets, not just in textiles, generally cost has been a big factor, because pile them high, sell them cheap is something that is, it's been around for a long time. And I think where people don't always understand, particularly if they come from a fairly traditional business, they don't always understand that there are huge benefits to producing small quantities, and you can pass some of that obviously onto the customer. But then it's like we said earlier on, it's looking at how much waste there is in the back end. And I think giving customers choice, people will always pay if they have more choice. And I think stocking less but printing on demand, or producing much more on demand, or producing even to inventory, is much more of an acceptable way to do business these days. If you can start to tell people that there's some ethical and social responsibility element to the product that you're producing, people see that there's a serious kind of social, environmental impact to that. It's the same as, going to Marks and Spencer's or going to the supermarket here in Hong Kong or anywhere in the world and having to pay for a carrier bag. People now, they understand that they need to do that because there's a social responsibility element to that. It hasn't meant that people have shopped less. It just means that they're prepared to pay a little more for their groceries, and if it's something as important as their clothing, they're prepared to pay more to do the right thing. Let's put it that way.
Right. So if you're looking at digital printing right now, there's the printing on garments or on other finished goods, but there's also that whole side of printing on textiles, right? Printing on
Yes.
on the actual yards of fabric or meters of fabric.
Yeah.
How do you see that in terms of adoption compared to printing on garments? Because I think a lot of digital printing started off printing on a garment or on another finished product. How much market adaptation has there been to printing on rolls of fabric?
I think it's getting much bigger. There's obviously a huge amount of technology out there. The direct to garment space is probably a little smaller, and obviously there are several big players in there. One of which obviously I work for. In the printing on fabric space, the competition is much larger. And if you look at the type of technology that has to replace, speed is obviously of the essence. So speed and quality are super important in that market, because you're replacing really old traditional rotary screen presses, and for that side of things, there's much more competition. And again, there's certain things that obviously you can't do with a garment printer that you can with the roll-to-roll type of printers in terms of speed and just the sheer volume of product you can produce. And obviously, some of the key players out there are producing single pass textile printers as well, which will go a long way to replacing that rotary screen market as well. But again, there's so much opportunity to go out there. It really needs someone to be really focused on the right areas to go and replace first of all. You probably aren't going to go and replace all of that business immediately. But if you compare the textile market to the ceramics market, for example, which was moved very, very quickly into all digital, you'll see that there's a bit of a similarity in terms of it's an old traditional type of market. It was very much an analog process, but the ceramic space was moved very, very quickly to digital. And I can see textiles going the same way very, very quickly because of all this inflection point and because of what's happened in the global market in this past 9 to 10 months.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's interesting because one of the biggest problems in terms of having a more flexible supply chain in the garment side of things is oftentimes the need to bulk produce the fabric. So you can more readily make the garment one by one, but you still need to have all that fabric that's been screen printed or dyed or whatever at a big volume.
Yeah, and also, Jane, I think what we're seeing more and more of is people diversifying where they produce the fabric. So clearly right now there's there's going to be a huge anticipation for what's going to happen with the new government in the US and particularly with their relationship with China. But what we're seeing is companies may be looking to move away from China for most of their production. But where do they put it? Are they going to rely all on one market, or given the fact that COVID has had such a huge impact on being able to ship products out of different markets? I think what we'll see is much more diversification in where people produce. So they may have some factories closer to home in Europe, maybe have some factories in South America, in the US. And I think that will change as well. And with digital, it's very, very easy to produce smaller quantities than it is to produce all in China or Turkey or wherever and ship it all over the world. I think that's part of a change that we'll see in the coming year or two.
Well, I think that's really interesting because that would solve a very big problem for people who were doing woven garments. To be able to have that flexibility on fabric would be fantastic. And
Sure.
you're right, because I think that COVID has taught everybody that you need to diversify your supply chain. It's brought to light the fact that, okay, this time it was a pandemic, but next time it could be something with weather. Who knows? There's a lot of different things that could devastate your supply chain. So I think that everything that I'm hearing is that people want to be, it's an inconvenience to be fragmented like that, but on the other hand, it's a hedge against risk. So the opportunities that you're talking about with digital printing on fabric would be huge in supporting that.
Absolutely. And I can see it growing. And as I said, just the change will happen very, very quickly, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's funny, right? It takes such a long time for people to adapt to something because, I can remember how many years ago, right, when many of these digital printing companies were new and coming out here and trying very, very hard to get people to adapt it. But you're right, once it starts to gain traction, it just sort of flies.
Of course, and what you also have to look at as well, as we mentioned earlier on, it's the demographic of people who are coming into these businesses, and they understand that there's a different way to do things, and putting the business online is a big step in the right direction, and really streamlining that process and removing cost out of the business and being more efficient. It's much more important these days when competition's so huge. The competition these days isn't necessarily a huge conglomerate or a huge multinational company. It could be, as you said, some guys working out their grandmother's basement who are just doing something different that's fresh and unique and just challenges the status quo. This is the great thing about where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we often don't realize how big that market of indie brands is because you don't really hear about them. They're not in the news. And yet one by one, they add up, right? It's like those grains of sand that individually you don't notice, but when you put them all together, wow, it's a lot. So I think that, that's taking a bigger and bigger piece of the market for sure.
Well, it's funny, Jane. I was in the gym yesterday, and I saw a guy with a T-shirt, and I didn't recognize the logo, so I kind of looked it up, and it was a company called Gymshark, and it's a company founded by two guys. And it's a over $1 billion business now. I think the business is 8 years old. It's crazy.
That's right.
This is such an amazing time for people going and being creative and doing something different. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Gymshark has been a massive success story. It's just an incredible business model, and it's, as you've said, it's just taken off like wildfire. So it's interesting. It's not possible to do a lot of these things if you don't have that flexible, without having that supply chain flexibility. So, it's interesting the way digital printing is tying in. When you look at digital printing right now, what's the next big thing?
Wow. If I knew that, I think making it easier for people to transition is the key part. So with all of this, the business I used to work for several years ago were in all different areas of digital print, including in textiles. And the number one thing for them was really making it easy for customers. This is the people who invest in the technology, for them to make it easy to get the jobs through that process. So workflow is going to be super important, I believe, particularly as we see more and more buying decisions being made online. So if it's something that does involve 3 meters of fabric printed so that someone can make their own dress at home, you need to remove the cost and the touch points in this to make it really, really profitable for the company who are making who are printing the textile, but also cheap enough for someone to decide that they are going to design their own fabric and print it. So you can't do that with human intervention. You have to make it as streamlined as possible. So I think development on software, streamlining the process, creating these ecosystems is going to be really, really important. And I think that's where we'll see a lot of movement in the next 12 months or so. Because if we remain locked down, and hopefully we won't, with vaccines coming out, and hopefully that should fix the coronavirus situation. But whenever people aren't able to go out and shop in the same way that they have been used to, something has to change. And I also believe that particularly here in markets like Asia, where going and shopping and going to a shopping mall is still part of the social life, that has to change because people are very cautious. They don't want to be in big crowds. They don't want to be queuing up in a line waiting to pay for things. So going online is going to be more and more prevalent. Reducing those touch points and making it easy for companies to move from analog to digital will be a big impact. And I think software development and workflow and streamlining that process is going to be the next big thing, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I just wanted to ask you, because right now we've mainly been talking about direct-to-consumer, but another area that I see a lot of interest in, and some development, but certainly a lot of interest amongst companies, and that is being able to reduce the huge cost and time of sampling. How are you seeing digital printing in that, or is digital printing not really being used in sampling?
I think there's a couple of things. I think it goes back to what we've just been speaking about, goes back to software. Goes back to people being able to design things and make alterations very, very quickly. And I also believe it comes back to the points we've all been speaking about. It's funny, a friend of mine works for an Italian brand, and she was frequently on the train from Hong Kong to China 2-3 times a week when they got their fashion, their latest season. That's not being done anymore. She's not been able to travel to China, obviously, for a long, long time. So moving things more into software and being able to tweak and adjust and having very high quality graphics certainly makes that much more accessible. And then it all connects up. So you're designing your product, you take those designs and send them to the digital printer, and it's all part of that ecosystem that we spoke about. So certainly, I think sampling it has to change because the ability of getting things quickly now is changed, and I think we'll probably see some differences in the way that people create their seasons. And by no means am I a fashion expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's definitely slowed down the rate of product coming out because it's all the things we talked about. It's having waste and not being able to get products into shops and not being able to get people into shops to buy things. So it goes back to what I said, the creation of ecosystems and having your fashion brands then decide that they're going to give you the options of creating a different collar or a different hemline on your clothing. They can do that so easy with software and with on-demand printing. I think that makes a big step towards changing the supply chain as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think that, in a sense, it's been sort of an upheaval for the design side of the industry and certainly, planning collections. But I think that, like you said, it'll enable people to slow down a bit and to sort of choose their own pace, whether you want to be very fast and have many, many collections throughout the year, or whether you feel that for your particular customer base, you don't need to have that many. But you'll have more options because you won't be tethered to this kind of very huge and volume demanding supply chain.
Yeah, we'll see more and more. I'm sure we'll see more and more micro factories, small setups where, as you said earlier on, if the production landscape changes so much that we're now producing in different countries, it gives you the ability to make micro factories where you're online designing your garments, and you decide that you want your dress with long sleeves instead of short sleeves. That will give you the ability to do that. And software's the way that you would create that. You put your measurements into the computer. It gives you a very high quality rendered avatar, and you can dress it and look how things change when you change the different lengths and shapes. And then it's all produced bespoke for you on a digital printer with a microfactory at the end of it. And this is going to become more and more important, I'm sure, to many brands.
Yes, definitely. I think that at this point, people are yearning for that, whereas before they were resisting it.
Absolutely. Look, I think with all of this, I don't think the end customer really cares. They want to get something that's colorful, that's high quality, something that's accessible. More and more customers, as you said, are really much more focused on the environment. Quality is definitely there. There's a cost attached to that, of course, but it's getting much more manageable. And I think if they understand that they can charge more for an individual product to a certain demographic or certain markets, then they should accept that and embrace it and change the way that they do business. But I do think it will take time. But there's a real amazing reason to do it right now, because the world has changed.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? The things that we take for granted now that came about because of other situations at some point in history.
Well, funnily enough, I spoke to, I'm a guy that used to fly well over 100 times a year. And I just spoke to some friends and said that I've probably walked further than I've flown this year. And that shows that things certainly have changed. And heading up a region like Asia Pacific, where you need to travel and not being able to do that, is certainly a real change in the way you do business. But as I say, we have to change with the times and make sure that we're adapting and staying afloat, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Everything comes down to survival. First you survive and then you thrive.
Exactly.
Other than cost, what are some of the other resistance points that people have to switching to digital printing?
A lot of the resistance that you get, it tends to come from the people in the middle of the organization, because they see their world's changing and see that they have to adapt. So generally, what we found over the many years of my career, it's not always the people at the top that are pushing back. They're obviously the guys who have to sign the checks at the end of the day. But if we can persuade them that the world and the business has to change to stay afloat, then they buy into it. And obviously that's part of a salesman's job to go and convince them. But then what you see is a big resistance in the middle part of the business, because there's a lot of change and a lot of adaptation that needs to be done. So generally, the resistance is it's a scary new world, right? So that we're doing something that maybe the people who are expected to operate the technology maybe feel that there's a threat to their positions and a threat to their roles. And again, just a lot of pushback. Particularly, there's a lot of focus on quality, and it's. The question about quality is it saleable quality? Is your customer going to come in because they like the design, because they like the style, and are they expected to keep it for 2-3 years? Or are they going to wear it once and then throw it in the trash? And I think that's the changing dynamic that we have to get people in the fashion and textile industry to understand. It is perfectly acceptable quality, but it's different to what they've been used to. And I think that's a lot of the pushback that we tend to get in any form of digital print, not just in fashion.
Well, I think that's true, yes, across any industry. There's always a sector that doesn't like change just because it's change.
It's really about persuading people that there's a real reason to do this, and it's the right time for businesses to look at changing the way that they go to market and that they produce product, because that's what the market demands.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think that right now people have so many different things that they're trying to figure out, but digitization is going to be a big part of it. So the insights that you brought based on all your experience have just been incredible.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope people see the great opportunities in digital print and changing the supply chain for the better. And as I say, change is upon us, and we have to grab it with both hands and really do the right thing.
Very true. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jane.
If you enjoyed this episode, Why not subscribe to the podcast? You'll be notified each week as we release a new episode. And if you're looking for a sharp view of global sourcing, or you're struggling to get your quarterly sourcing reports done, you might want to take a look at the current situation in sourcing. These executive snapshot reports include all the insights and data you need, without you having to do the work. In other words, all that tedious work is now done for you. You can find a link for further information in the show notes here.